The Positive Pause is a motivational-minded podcast covering topics women want to know about as they journey to and through menopause, focusing on subjects that impact women's health and healthy aging, including what it means to age healthfully. The Positive Pause features experts and influencers from a variety of industries and specialties. The information and opinions expressed on the Positive Pause are not intended to replace the services of trained professionals or to provide specific medical advice. To see the National Menopause Foundation's full medical disclaimer, please visit nationalmenopausefoundation.org.
Welcome to the Positive Pause. I'm Claire Gill, founder of the National Menopause Foundation. Joining me today is Sabrina Johnson, the president and CEO of Daré Bioscience. Daré Bioscience has one mission: to put women's health first. They aim to look at the critical gaps in women's healthcare that are often overlooked and underfunded. Sabrina founded Daré Bioscience operations in 2015 and has served as president, CEO, and a member of the board of directors since its inception. She is a life sciences executive committed to advancing improvements in women's healthcare. Previously, she served as president of Women Care Global Trading, a specialty pharmaceutical company in female reproductive healthcare with commercial product distribution in over 100 countries. Thank you so much for speaking with me today, Sabrina.
My gosh, thank you.
So we met at a Women's Health and Research and Innovation Impact Conference recently,
Yes.
And we started this discussion, and I found it so interesting that I asked you to join me on this podcast so we could continue the conversation. And so I'm very excited to have you be part of the Positive Pause.
I'm like, thank
Let's
you.
Start with a little background. So as I noted in my intro, you spent a lot of time in the bioscience and pharmaceutical industry, but let's talk about what made you passionate about working in women's health specifically.
So as you noted, I've spent more years than I like to admit sometimes working in this industry, so over 35 years now. And I've had the privilege of holding all different kinds of positions. I started out as a bench scientist. I've been in pharmaceutical sales and marketing. I've been a chief financial officer. And I've also had the privilege of working in a lot of different therapeutic areas and making a difference in all kinds of different diseases over the course of my career. And a couple of the products that I worked on before forming this company were conditions that primarily affect women. One was fibromyalgia and one was rheumatoid arthritis. And both of those experiences definitely got me thinking more about women's health and why were these conditions disproportionately affecting women? What was it about them? And then the more I thought about women's health and thought about also reproductive health, I was very involved in reproductive health in the community. It just got me thinking that, wow, professionally, I would love for my next opportunity to be working on some of the products that either I wish I had, or I want to make sure I have, or I want my daughters to have at some point in time. And what shocked me, because I was not someone, well, take a step back. You sometimes meet people who are just aspiring to be a CEO, right? They say, I want to found a company. That's my goal in life is I want to found a company and be a CEO. I was not one of those people. So I was looking for just an opportunity to make a difference in women's health by joining a company already working in that space. And what I found was that instead of leaning in, the pharmaceutical industry was really leaning out of women's health, which was surprising because what I also saw as I tried to understand why is everyone leaning out when we're half the population and there are so many problems they'll be solving. What was also surprising is that I saw there was a lot of promising science. So it was not a matter that we simply just did not understand biology whatsoever, or that there was no evidence as to what might be a really compelling therapeutic solution. It was quite the contrary. I saw a lot of promising science that simply took a dedication to move it forward. So that was a spark for me. And after multiple, probably months of saying to my poor husband, why is no one doing this? Why is no one doing this? Why isn't anyone working on these products that I'm finding and these interesting opportunities? You know, you kind of wake up one morning and it's kind of like, wait, I'm someone. I could be doing this. I'm someone. And I've definitely had background and experience to confidently try to do this. So that was really it. So it came from working on that back to back, the rheumatoid arthritis, the fibromyalgia, right back to back. and then really thinking about what's going on. And then next thing I knew, I founded the company.
No, I love it. It's if not me, who, right? It's just, you just have to sometimes step in and do it. So it's interesting that you were talking about that there wasn't a shortage of science or that things to be able to consider, because historically, women's health research and innovation has been so incredibly underfunded. And we've used this statistic a billion times about less than 10% of the entire National Institutes of Health budget is about women's health across the lifespan, like really birth to grave. It's crazy. And I really think that's a health crisis for us in women's health. And we have so much work to do. So can you talk a little bit about what the process is to bring those clinically validated therapies to market for women? And what are some of the challenges that you've seen then?
100%. And I want to touch first on something that you just said, because I want to be clear on one thing, because you pointed out something that is absolutely a healthcare crisis, right? The amount of investment in conditions that either solely affect women or disproportionately affect women is completely disproportional with the size of the population or the disease impact or the healthcare impact, right? So we hear all different statistics, 1% of private healthcare investment, 4% of total healthcare investment, doesn't matter which way you cut the math, it's all dismal. And there's a lot more work to be done. And there are a lot of conditions where, as a result, we do not understand the biology well enough to really develop a compelling therapeutic. And so where we decided to focus, and I will get into all the challenges, right? The work it takes to bring something forward, where we decided as a company to focus is, where do we feel we actually have enough science to close that gap between that signal of what that promising science is and an actual solution, right? A real world solution that a woman can use. And so where we focused on as a company is identifying those conditions. And a lot of it came from talking to healthcare providers, talking to women about where are the therapeutic gaps, what would be a blue sky ideal target product to address that.
Yeah.
Then we would literally try to match that with science that existed. And I'll give some concrete examples and also talk about then what it takes to then bring a clinically validated product to market. And so where we decided to focus on initially is all of those gaps and potential solutions that relied on medicine, a pharmaceutical ingredient that had already been FDA approved for something else.
Okay.
And the reason we wanted to start there is because, one, there are thousands of those drugs, by the way. No medicine only does one thing, and no medicine can only be delivered one way. But when you start with those drugs that have already been through an FDA review process or FDA approved for something, they have already established so many important things. They've established safety. They've established that they can be bioavailable in certain forms, right? They've established that they can have certain types of effect. And therefore, when you think about trying to solve some problems quickly, that's a fantastic place to start, because we're going to just be able to fast forward the process. Because what it then takes to show that something's clinically validated, really show that it's clinically validated, think about all the things you're going to want to understand about it. You're going to want to understand about a medicine. I'm going to give a real specific example now. One of the things that we're developing is a product for arousal in women, right? So men have had Viagra for 30 years, and that's fantastic. But women can also experience decreased blood flow to the genital tissue. And that, just like it's super important in men for that to happen, in women, that's what leads to not only pleasurable sensations, which are 100% important, but also just blood flow is what causes lubrication, right? So it's what causes a physical response and also a very important response to the overall experience. And so if you start there and we say, okay, we want to develop a product like this for women, one, you want to understand what is the right drug to do that. So we decided same active ingredient as in Viagra. Actually, Pfizer even did some work in women. So there was a great kind of evidence proof of concept. But then you want to understand the biology. Do women have the same kind of receptors in the same places as men? So do we have to think about dosing it different? And that process determined that, well, this should actually for women be a topical formulation of sildenafil that can be delivered on demand, because systemically, otherwise we're going to have to give her too much of the drug, that we're going to have too many off-target effects to have the localized effects we want. So part of that clinical validation process is actually determine what is the right dosage form, formulating it to do that. You can't just mix stuff up into you can't just literally mix some sildenafil into a tub of cream and hope something that's going to happen. You actually have to optimize that process, the manufacturing, not just the recipe, but how you're going to mix them together, how you're going to make it so you get the outcome you want, which is that sildenafil getting into the tissue really quickly. Once you got into that step, it's all still part of clinical validation. Then you have to show first in animals. I always love to say I'm a vegan. I'm the last person in the world who wants to do animal testing, but that is a requirement and it's important. So then you've got to do all kinds of different animal studies to understand the safety profile of the product. And we do that first in animals. So for a product like this, it's going to be used around sexual activity. You're doing vaginal studies, you're doing oral studies, you're doing anal studies, right? All the orifices you can imagine, you're studying it that way. And then importantly, also in animals, because this is going to be women of reproductive age, you're going to do reproductive toxicology. You're going to make sure that it's not going to be a problem if someone is using the product and gets pregnant.
Okay.
That's part of the clinical validation. Then you go on, all that looks good. Then you move on and you show what side effects happen if someone uses the product, and you're just looking at side effects. You're looking at adverse events that happen. You're not looking at, is it doing anything good? You're just looking at what things does someone report that they don't like that is happening. And again, for a product like this, you're doing that in women and you're doing that in men, because they could both be, depending on the nature of the sexual partner, they could be, for a topical product like this, they could be exposed. So you're looking both of that to understand that. You do that. Then the next part of clinically validated is, okay, the premise here is that a woman is going to apply this and really quickly it's going to increase blood flow. Does it do that? So then you actually have to run a study to show very basically, like, this was the premise. Does it actually do that? That's not the way someone's going to use it at home, because in this case, you actually have to use special heat sensing cameras that look at blood flow. Women are in stirrups and it's a very artificial situation, but that allows you to show that yes, sildenafil in this formulation, which we call Dare to Play, is getting into the tissue and is increasing blood flow. Important check mark. Then you get to go on and actually let women use it at home, right? And you can't just go straight to letting women use it at home. The next part of clinical validation is actually to understand, if I'm going to let women use this at home and I want to understand how it's working for them, what should I be asking them?
Yeah.
What are the questions even, right? Yeah. What would tell me that it's doing what it's supposed to do? And that's important. Not just that it's doing something, but it's important to her what it's doing. It's meaningful to her.
It's meeting the need. It's meeting whatever the need is, right?
Yeah. And you do that in a study that's conducted that doesn't even use your product. That part of clinical validation is literally an investment you're making in understanding the need, like you said very beautifully, right? What is the need? What are you looking to have happen? And how should I ask you about that to make sure that's happening? And then once you do that, next part of clinical validation is you start using it in your target population and have them use it and have them answer those questions. And again, continue to evaluate. Not only now you get to evaluate is what positive effects it's having, but you're also going to continue to evaluate what unanticipated or maybe unwanted effects that it's having. So that's all part of clinically validated. And I think what's important is not every prescription product is held to those same standards. I think sometimes we're assuming if a healthcare provider is providing something via prescription, or we find something online and we're going to go through a telehealth process to get a prescription for something, just because it's a prescription does not mean that it's gone through that process.
Well, why wouldn't it have to go through that process?
Because the Food and Drug Administration, which is the agency, right, that oversees safety and efficacy of drugs, right, along with they have food responsibilities, but drugs, medicines responsibilities, They recognized a long time ago something that is very important, that sometimes a patient might need something, that they might need a medicine in a form that is not available in an FDA approved form of the drug that's already been through all that clinical validation, right?
Okay.
So I'll give you an example. Let's say you're allergic to something in a particular medicine that your doctor wants you to take. And so unfortunately, you aren't going to be able to take this medicine that's super important for you because you're allergic to this ingredient in it. FDA said a long time ago that you should still be able to get the benefit of that medicine. And so they've put rules in place that says on a named patient basis, right, special for you, your doctor can work with a special kind of pharmacy to mix you up a version of that medicine you need that maybe doesn't have that ingredient in there that you're allergic to. But that finished product is going to be a prescription for you. But actually, that finished product has never been clinically validated. Like the FDA allows that to happen because they know that there's a healthcare need you might have that is not going to otherwise be served because you're allergic to this ingredient, and they want to have a mechanism where you can still have that. And then about 10 years or so ago, a little more, 15 years or so ago, the FDA also recognized that for some medicines, it may be very likely that a lot of people might need the product in a different form than how it's FDA approved. They don't want a pharmacy just mixing that up for you because that can't be following the same kind of quality standards that they normally require for pharmaceutical products. So they've said for certain drugs, and sildenafil is actually one of them, that they will allow large-scale pharmaceutical manufacturing facilities that will register with the FDA and be subject to FDA inspection to manufacture those products on a large scale and follow pharmaceutical standards. So the nice thing there is now they're following really important quality standards that mean that if you're getting a prescription of a product made in that way, it's going to be the same every time you get it, right?
It's
3
just
years.
right.
Yeah. That still doesn't mean, though, that they have to undergo clinical validation of that formula. All that means is that they have to manufacture that formula under certain quality standards. And the reason I highlight all this is because I think as healthcare consumers, it's so hard for us to know what we're getting. And with the advent of telehealth and the advent of more what's called compounding, well, all of what I'm describing is compounding, when you're taking an FDA-approved drug, but you're making it not in the way that it was made and studied and reviewed by the FDA, it's still going to be a prescription product, but it's not subject to that same level of clinical validation. And so for us to be really informed healthcare consumers, I think it's important to understand that so we can ask the right questions.
That is such a great explanation, first of all, Sabrina.
Thank you.
Not in a way that even I, as the layperson, non-clinical, can understand, which I love, because as you said, people are throwing around the whole compounding and what that
Yes.
means, and it's safe, and I get mine compounded. No one knows what they're talking about, right?
Yeah, right. That's exactly right.
Nice way to describe how some of this comes about and what those different levels of validation are, and why, as hard as it is, we as consumers, as you say, need to be better informed and really do the due diligence ourselves on what are we being asked to take and who are we taking it from. And so that's really, really important. Okay, so I love that. And we probably could spend a whole podcast talking about that, honestly. But now let's go back to a little bit more of so if you're a company, well, I have two questions. One, I want to ask you again, what are the biggest challenges you face of you bringing that stuff to market? So let's start with that, but then I want to remember to go back and ask you another question. Okay.
Yeah. So some of the biggest challenges are, especially when we think about women's health writ large, right, is that there are so many opportunities to do better in women's health. And what that means, therefore, is that there are so many therapeutic gaps where those conversations with the Food and Drug Administration around what are the right animal studies? What are the right human studies? What are the right questions to ask the women, right? What is the expectation? What does success look like? What is clinically meaningful? No one's done that before. So what makes women's health, I think, in many of these indications extra challenging, but also extra important, is that someone has to have those conversations. And those are the challenging, not challenging because the conversations are challenging, but challenging because to do that process right takes time.
It takes time and investment.
And money.
And money. That's right. It takes time and money.
And to give an example, by the way, to do the process of like understanding from women, what are the right questions, right? Let's use again the arousal example. If I want to understand from women, what are the right questions about arousal that we should be asking you in a clinical trial? What's going to be clinically meaningful? What's important? The study to do that, just that study, and you're not even looking at the drug yet, is around $500,000 to do that right? Because this is not like a questionnaire that I'm mailing my buddies, right? Like, how do you like it? This is a serious process of 90-minute interviews with women to understand, to have them talk about what they experience. What does arousal mean to you? What are you experiencing? What does it concern you? Does it bother you? Are you stressed about it? Do you feel guilty? Do you feel confident? Do you feel, what does the word tingling mean to you? Warmth. Is that the right word to describe it?
Yeah.
Right. So imagine, and we never talk about that. The process, it's a lot of investment to do it right, but women deserve for it to be done.
No, we deserve it. It's a necessity, right? If you think about that it really should be the baseline that we do this right and not just putting things out there because women are eager to get relief for things, but to do it right because we deserve that level of care and making sure that it's there. So that's truly important. So my other question then was, when you talk about that there's the opportunity in women's health with these ingredients or drugs that have already been FDA approved for one other thing, to switch it over, do some additional research and studying and validation to be able to use it for women's health, why wouldn't large pharmaceutical companies snap up those opportunities to take what's already validated and apply it to women's health? It feels like to me, given how much they invest in creating therapeutics, that would be a no-brainer. We would have a lot quicker pipeline of women's things coming to the market. But clearly that's not happening. If you had to create a company yourself to do that.
Yeah. So I would say, a couple things. And actually, I'm going to also tie it back to compounding in a second. But in the pharmaceutical industry, you often hear figures if you're learning about what does it take to get a pharmaceutical product to market. It can be hundreds of millions to $1 billion to $2 billion if you're starting from scratch, right? With a brand new chemical entity and getting it to the finish line. And by the way, only 10% of those brand new chemical entities make it to—
I don't understand that. That's so true. I have to just say, I learned that under my bone role. And when we as consumers complain about, oh my God, the cost of medications and all crazy, whatever, what no one talks about is the billions of dollars that are invested every year that completely fail. Nothing comes to market and you have to start over.
Yeah.
Right. And so when you get a good one, when you get one that works, then you try to recoup. Right. That's our crazy system that we have.
That is the system that we have. And so, I always like to tell my friends about it. Like, imagine that, like, I'm going to give you $1 split up, but you're going to flush 90 cents of it down the toilet. Every time I give you $1, you're just going to flush 90 cents away. That's like what it is, right? So for the pharmaceutical industry, for those large pharmaceutical companies, they really can only invest in things that they think are going to have, you said it beautifully, one, that they think are going to have a really big financial return and that they're going to be able to do a lot of stuff with, but importantly, during a time of what we think about as exclusivity, patent life, when no one else can go do it. Like before, we hear the word sometimes generics, and we know when we go pick up our medicine at the pharmacy, if we agree to get a generic, it's cheaper. And all that means that that drug no longer has that kind of exclusivity. But that also speaks to why we formed Daré around this concept, because we were very focused on, we want to get the best solutions to women as fast as we possibly can. And we want to use all the regulatory paths at our disposal to get them clinically validated products as quickly as we possibly can, solutions. But we are accepting that maybe some of these solutions aren't going to have the same kind of patent protection.
Oh, interesting.
right?
Oh,
That
that's
and that a
huge.
brand new chemical entity might have, and
That's
that a
huge.
brand new chemical entity might have. By the way, that doesn't mean that it's not also financially rewarding. We're a publicly traded company, right? We are working hard to do social good, and we believe that is not disconnected from also being a good investment for our investors. We can do
Right.
both. And in fact, because by using drugs that have already been proven before, we can keep our timeline shorter. We can get our costs down because we don't have to reinvent, right? We're not having a 90 cent. We're not flushing 90 cents in the dollar down the toilet, right? Because these chemicals have been proven. We just have to make sure they're doing what we hope in our specific population. And what that also means, because we're doing that, again, we're very focused on filling gaps in care as quickly as we can. It also means that for many of our products, we can leverage the positives of what the FDA was trying to achieve with compounding, which is fill solutions, right? Fill voids that exist with a product that is using that known pharmaceutical ingredient, but is tailored specifically for what is needed for that condition. But what we're saying as a company is for us, again, I'll use my sildenafil cream as an example. It's not enough to just for us to feel good about mixing sildenafil, which conceptually makes sense for arousal in women because we know it increases blood flow and that's mechanistically what we want to do. For us as a company, we don't think it's enough for women to just mix that into a tub of cream and hand it to you and tell you we have an arousal product as a compounded product.
Right.
For us, what we think women deserve is clinical validation. We want to do the work, right? To show it's having the effect that we want the medicine to have. And if we can make that available to women as what's called 503B compounded product, I don't want to get into it, but that means it's manufactured under those pharmaceutical standards, not a pharmacy making it small, big manufacturing made big batches that are subject to very consistent quality regulations. If we can do that and get that to you today, while we continue that long process we talked about of working with the Food and Drug Administration of what ultimately, if something's going to be actually FDA approved and indicated as safe and effective to treat a condition, what ultimately are all those requirements? While we spend the years doing that, once we've gotten some clinical validation, like by using the kind of drugs we choose to use, that often means we can get it to women and healthcare providers a lot faster while we're still doing all that long process.
And it's still by prescription,
And
right?
it's still by prescription. Exactly.
So it's more than rather than like a single pharmacy removing one ingredient for one person, as you had described before. This is on a mass scale, doing that compounding of the ingredients that have been pre-approved at a pharmaceutical facility that has to follow regulations. That's very different. Okay.
And it's using the formula that we developed. Because by the way, we can't do that directly. So we've partnered with a third party that's registered to do that. They're called 503B outsourcing facilities. We basically have given us, so we took our formula. We did all this work with our formula, right? We did all these animal studies I talked about. We did the study in men and the study in women and the study looking at the endpoints and the study using those endpoints. And we published all of that, right? It's all published in peer-reviewed publications. And then while we're still talking to the FDA over here, we gave that recipe to this facility and said, go make it and make it available via prescription so women can have that today.
And then, so too, though, all the stuff that you've done to create it to that facility is also what you would need, and all the validation is what you need to get
to the FDA
anyway, right? It's just a matter of getting it done faster. That is really important for all of us to understand, right? How this works. And again, I've been at it for 13 years in the health industry. And I know you've been at it far longer, but I'm telling you 13 years. And I'm just grasping some of the concepts of how our health system works and how pharmaceuticals work and all that kind of stuff. So it is really complicated. So I know that not every woman is going to be able to go through and figure this out themselves, but that's why I love talking about it on this podcast, right? That we can give people some of the basic information so that you start thinking about this as you're talking to your healthcare provider about what they're prescribing for you and how that came about, right?
Exactly. And just the questions. I mean, and some of them are just basic so that you can spot, ask, has it been studied? Right? Just ask your healthcare provider, okay, you're recommending this product for me and you're prescribing it for me. Has it been studied? right? Is this an FDA approved product or if it's compounded? If it's compounded, that's great. They'll explain to you why they're doing that. Great. Is it pharmacy compounded or is it subject to pharmaceutical manufacturing standards for quality? Has there been any publications about its use? Is there anything I can read? And I'm not talking about a questionnaire where, again, you sent it out to
like peer-reviewed,
peer-reviewed, right? A peer-reviewed publication so that ask your healthcare provider those questions so that you can understand. You have the right to understand. And they'll be happy to explain to you, yes, I'm prescribing this product and it is studied and this is why I'm excited about it. Or I wish there was something that had clinical data and was peer reviewed. There isn't, but I really think you need this medicine. So this is the best option we have today. But you deserve to have that question and not just assume because it's a healthcare provider that,
right. That's so important. That leads me to my next question, although we're quickly breezing through our time here together. So I'm going to have you back on for a part 2, Sabrina, for sure. But first of all, I think what is important about that is I'm thinking even from the National Menopause Foundation thing, wow, we may need to create a checklist to help women come up with these questions.
I think it'd be great.
And have that to say, hey, here's some of those questions. And I might be reaching out to you and some other experts to talk about, okay, what should go in this kind of checklist to help women have the conversation.
And we have some on our website, by the way. We have some. It's in how to spot junk science is how we.
Well, that was my next question. Okay. So we talk about the fact that a clinician is providing something, right? And so that we automatically assume then that they've done all of the rigorous investigation and understanding of all of this and what they're recommending to us. But we also know that there's just not time for that for many clinicians. So let's talk a little bit about how people, consumers, women should evaluate science. I know you have a thing on your website about junk science, like you said. What does that, one, what does that mean? And then 2, I've been asked recently, now that there's all of these influencers out there who are clinicians, who are sharing science and talking about their interpretation of the science, and oftentimes it contradicts with another person or your own clinician who is also telling you what the science says, and it's not the same. How are we as consumers supposed to be able to digest and make a critical decision about our health with that? What are some tips about that?
It's such a fantastic question because you're right. We're navigating so much information. And I do think that one of the things that does make it complicated is that because everything's out there in social media, you're getting to see real time, even if it's clinician influencers, right? Actual healthcare providers and specialists in the area. What you're seeing live and scrolling through, if you want, is differences in medical opinion. That if you were going to go to 5 different clinicians about something and literally go have a brick and mortar appointment with 5 different clinicians might come up in those questions. And so I really think people should view it in that same way. When you're looking at something that you're reading, one influencer is saying, never use a compounded product. And another one is saying, I normally don't like compounded products, but I'm saying we should use Daré sildenafil cream. And here's why. Ask the questions. Just ask questions, just like the same thing you might make a little checklist for yourself. If you're going into a doctor's appointment and you wanted to use your time really well for your healthcare provider interview, just arm yourself with those questions. So one is just the question about, you're talking about this product, but where can I see the clinical data, right? Where are the data? Why are you excited about this? What about the clinical data has you excited? And they should have clinical data. So it's a big red flag right away where if the answer is, oh, well, there's no clinical data, but I really like it. That's a red flag. So ask about the data. Ask if the data have been published, right? What studies have they done? Have they been published? Are they available for me to look at directly as the consumer, right? It doesn't mean you want to read them, but you want to understand, have they made them available? Could I actually see them if I wanted to? Mm-hmm. I think it's sometimes hard for us to peel back the layer on is a lot of clinician influencers will be very clear around their disclosures, as they should be, right? Have they done consulting work for a particular pharmaceutical company? And I've had friends come to me and say, oh, I saw this person, she was paid by XYZ company, so I'm definitely not listening to her. And I always say to them, no, do not look at it that way. Actually, it's almost the opposite. if they have done a lot of work for a lot of different companies, that really probably means they're a leader in their field and they're an expert in their field. And actually, that is a positive thing. And they're making their disclosures so that you can understand that they have received that payment. But that doesn't mean that they're hawking that product because
That's right.
they got that payment, right? What it means is, wow, they're probably super well respected in the field and they're viewed by different companies as being a thoughtful expert and they're being very appropriate about sharing that. So I do think that's also an important distinction because
Important. We do this on same thing on bone all the time too. And it is that catch-22. You have some clinicians who say, if you do any consulting for any company, for any reason, you should be completely written off for not being in a position to be able to work on certain projects or do certain things and all that sort of stuff. But like you said, it's honest. As long as people disclose, it's the opposite. And that they're doing it, as you said, for multiple organizations, multiple companies under multiple different things. So it's not like they're not just paid by one in the industry. They're consulting for all, which just means their opinion and their ethics are respected. And that's why they're being asked to do it. But that is a whole debate within the medical field too. So you're right. That's important to know. But it's also, though, it's hard for consumers to know when someone is doing it ethically and when they're not. And then, as you said, when someone says, do you have the science? But I think what I'm talking about is when the differing medical opinion, when two respected leaders give you the exact opposite interpretation of the same peer-reviewed published study, that for consumers are like, wait.
And now what do you do? What do you do then?
Right.
And it is super hard. And that is then in the end, you've got to come down to your own. Ultimately, it's your own decision. It's your healthcare. And you've got to figure out where you're most comfortable understanding. And I think the other piece of that is also just that concept also of that affiliation that we were just talking about. If someone is on a telehealth platform that is also selling products, right? That's the same kind of red flag as someone who is paid by one particular, right? They're disclosing they're paid by one company and they certainly seem to be talking about that product, right? So just use, it's common sense, right? Where we can, let's use our common sense as a consumer.
Or ask for options when you're having those telehealth visits. What else is there out there? Let me make that decision about which product.
Yes. Is there an FDA approved solution, right? There are a lot of these platforms that are like hawking all kinds of estradiol creams. Guess what? There's FDA approved estradiol cream. FDA approved. It's been through the safety and efficacy evaluation and it's manufactured under those quality standards, right? If there is an FDA approved option in a form factor that you need, always ask for that. Always.
Right.
By the way, that goes for we don't have GLP-1s, but it goes for GLP-1s. I get so worried about people buying all these compounded GLP-1s. There's no reason. There's pharmaceutical companies that are making a product to a standard that formulation's been studied and it's manufactured so you know what you're getting.
And if it's so much cheaper in the way you're being done, there's a reason for that, right? There's a reason for that. And GLP-1s are covered by insurance. So again, hopefully, and we're working on more access to those FDA-approved treatments across the board for that in so many ways. So it's really important to think about that. So as I said, Sabrina, we're going to have to do a part 2 on this because
I would love to.
Other conversation that I really want to have with you, and I'm just teasing this up for the next one so that people will tune in, and we're going to do it right away so we can put it out as part 1 and part 2, is around how do we as women who are interested in this field get more involved and start putting our money and our capital behind those solutions that we want to see come to market. And that, because that's its own podcast. So
I'm excited for that podcast. Yes.
Yeah. But for today's, as we said, we've talked about some challenges. We've talked about some big things. You've given me great ideas about what we as a patient advocacy organization can help educate people on in more succinct ways. And so I'm making this promise publicly that I will start turning our attention to that and trying to create those tools for people. But given all those things that we've talked about, those challenges that we have in women's health, let's end on what are you most hopeful about in women's health?
Oh my gosh. I'm so hopeful the fact that we're having so many of these conversations. And for organizations like yours that are doing such a great job of empowering women, giving women the tools so that they can speak up, remove the stigma, have the conversations. Because that's the start, right? The start is having those conversations and setting high expectations of what we deserve to solve it.
Oh, I love that. I'm going to use that, Sabrina. Have high expectations about what we deserve, because that is not what women are taught to do. And we have to train ourselves to have those high expectations and to demand them. So I love that. And I think that is a very powerful and purposeful and positive thing to think about moving forward. So I'm so grateful for you being here and having this conversation with me.
It's been so fun.
Really, really important topic. And I'm going to, as I said, have more information with this episode notes about you and about your company and about some of the topics that we've talked about. And I really hope that people will tune in for part 2 of this conversation. But thank you again to my guest, Sabrina Johnson, President and CEO of Daré Biosciences. And thank you for listening. We hope you'll tune in to another episode of The Positive Pause.